Could this brand new Roku Plus Series TV be a sleeper hit for 2023? We're about to find out. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison, and today we're going to be checking out the brand new Roku Plus Series TV. This is the premium option from Roku's first ever go at making its own brand of TV. Not only will I be reviewing this TV, I'm also going to talk about why this TV's very existence is a big deal, what the implications are, etc., along with what I think is fair to expect from this TV and what kind of competition it's up against. I mean, hey, you only get one coming out party, right? So we might as well do it up right. Are you ready? I hope so, because we're gonna get to it. But not before I thank you, as always, for watching. Please click some buttons of support if you find this video helpful, and stick around to the end because I've got a question I'd love for you to answer in the comment section. And speaking of the comment section, watch out for scammers. I'm not giving anything away right now, nor is Digital Trends. So if someone creeps up and says, "You've won a prize," it's BS, okay? Even if it looks like us. Good looking out. Okay, let's dig into Roku's Plus Series. Let's start with why this TV is important. This is something I tried to get into a video I put out during CES when Roku made this announcement, but well, the audio failed us and it was pretty hard to hear. So let's try this again, okay? Roku has been making blueprints for TVs for years now. It specs out plans for all kinds of details, such as what kind of power supply is needed, where to put the power supply, where to put the HDMI board, where to put the speakers, how much power to feed the speakers, and so on. Where the manufacturer gets those parts and which parts of the blueprint to use and ignore has always been up to the manufacturer. And Roku seemed pretty happy with its place in the TV business. It provides those blueprints to manufacturers, and along with it, its TV operating system. It continues to make streaming boxes and sticks, and it's been developing its own entertainment channels. Seems like that's been working well for Roku. TCL, Hisense, and several other brands have been making Roku TVs, helping to get Roku's OS and customer experience into the hands of over 70 million users as of 2022. And it makes sense Roku would want to continue to grow, but is making your own TV, becoming a TV brand when your business has been based on partnerships with other TV brands, is that the right move? I mean, you kind of have to wonder what kind of impact this would have on partnerships with brands like TCL and Hisense, who have both shown a willingness to also produce Google TVs. I mean, maybe it's all smiles and handshakes now, but what if Roku's TVs were to take a bite out of TCL and Hisense's business? It's fine to say, hey, there's enough room for all of us right now, but is there really? So that's one risk that Roku has taken on, but no matter how all of that plays out in the future, there's another inescapable risk. Roku needs its newly found TV division to succeed. Starting a TV brand requires huge investments, and TVs don't come with a lot of profit margin. Roku's never been about making money off its hardware. It gets its payday from its OS and the licensing and ad revenue that comes through it. The TV itself is just a Trojan horse as far as revenue is concerned. Frankly, I can't help but wonder if Roku decided to make this big move during its recent salad days, when a lot of tech companies were experiencing a bit of a high during a time when everyone was locked down at home. For Roku, that meant a lot of streaming. Now that things have changed, though, a lot of tech companies are experiencing a pretty uncomfortable come down, Roku included. And that raises the stakes. Roku's TVs really need to sell. Fortunately, Roku's brand is on pretty solid footing. It's a known quantity, so Roku doesn't face any broad trust issues with its customer base. But I do think folks who don't know the ins and outs of the TV making business may wonder if Roku can really make a good-looking TV just because it also makes good streaming boxes and streaming sticks. Well, it's time to find out. The Roku Plus Series is what I gather Roku thinks is the right blend of premium and accessible. It made a TV for streaming. Makes sense, right? And Roku says that it put its efforts and the associated costs into things like full array local dimming and quantum dot color brightness expansion, and saved costs by using a 60 Hz panel instead of a 120 Hz panel, or leaning too hard into including a bunch of gaming features. Now, as TV enthusiasts, it might be easy to scoff at 60 Hz panel and no HDMI 2.1, but I think Roku is making a smart move here. It's targeting a massive audience and trying to meet that massive audience with a nice price. Which leads us to what will be the crux of this review. The price for this 65-inch Plus series is currently $800. The 55-inch version is $650 and the 75-incher is $1,200. All of them available exclusively at Best Buy. For now. Wait, time out, hold the phone. Y'all, not even 24 hours after I recorded this video, the prices on these TVs dropped significantly. The 65 is down $150, the 75 down $200, and I suspect that eventually these prices will stick. Roku says it's a sale for now, but these prices will probably carry forward. Obviously, that changes the calculus for this video a bit. The value of the Roku Plus series just ticked up several notches, so going forward, keep that in mind. The performance comparisons remain the same, but the pricing puts the Plus series right in line, not above the compared TVs, which makes it significantly more competitive. Now, naturally, as we start talking about the performance of this TV, I want to draw comparisons to other TVs in that price bracket. And I suspect that's what you want me to do as well. So I will. I mean, I'll try. See, it's kind of tough to do that right now. Now, finally, let's get to the performance of this TV. Getting this TV ready to review didn't include any surprises, okay? The unboxing was pretty straightforward. I had a lot of plastic to remove, but you shouldn't. The legs on this TV require 3 screws each and have strong TCL and Hisense TV vibes. The back of this TV, though, is very interesting to me because unlike many TV brands we see coming through here, rather than spread the electronics out over as many square inches as possible for the shallowest depth possible, Roku seems to bunch it up in a smaller but deeper area, which, aside from increasing the total mounting depth of this TV, also pushes the input bay well toward the center of the TV. Hard to know if this is going to be problematic for anyone, but I'm just imagining myself trying to connect an HDMI cable after the TV is already wall mounted and thinking that could be a little bit of a pain. The TV comes with the Roku Pro remote, which means it's rechargeable via USB. It's got a switch on it that enables or disables hands-free voice commands for the mic that's built in. Also has a headphone jack built in for private listening, though you can also use Roku's app for that task. Plus, it has 2 assignable buttons labeled 1 and 2, in addition to the hotkeys for Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and Apple TV Plus, which, granted, could change as the year progresses, but presently the most sensible assembly of apps I've seen on a remote yet, so well done on that one, Roku. I should also take this time to mention that while it wasn't exactly lightning fast, the TV did take significantly less time to get updated and set up than even very recent Roku TV setup experiences I've had. I was already logged into many of my apps, not Netflix though, which is probably Netflix's fault. Also, the operation of this TV is probably the fastest Roku experience I've ever had. I still think Roku OS could use a facelift. That alone is a big reason why some folks prefer Google TV. It doesn't have to be that way, but at least this is lightning quick from navigation to app loading, and I really appreciate that. As I mentioned before, the TV doesn't support 4K at 120 Hz, but it does support HDR, HDR10+, and Dolby Vision. You can also seamlessly integrate any of Roku's soundbars, speakers, or subwoofers, along with any of Roku's smart home devices, of which there is a rather rapidly growing catalog. The TV itself looks smart enough. 3 virtually borderless bezels along with a wide metallic strip on the bottom. Pretty standard fare these days. Now it's numbers for nit nerds time, or as someone suggested recently, we could just call this section nitpicking. What do you like better, numbers for nit nerds or nitpicking? Let me know down in the comments. Anyway, this is where we get into some measurements I got for which I use Calman Ultimate software along with a C6 colorimeter profiled to an X-Rite i1 Pro 2. My measurement equipment is about to change, by the way, which I'm very excited about, but we'll have to leave that for a future video. At any rate, here's the news for better or worse. By the way, you can skip some of this nerdy stuff by using the time code down in the description if you want. Anyway, I used the movie mode for SDR and HDR, and I used a customized version of Dolby Vision Normal with a warm color temperature to measure the TV's peak brightness and color accuracy, as well as color gamut. I disabled most extraneous processing, but one setting that is absolutely going to be crucial to this discussion is the local dimming setting. You can choose off, low, medium, and high. And I can tell you right now that you should never have this setting turned off. And for me, the low setting wasn't ever useful. But if you get this TV, you have some decisions to make about whether to use medium or high, and I'll explain more about that as we go forward. There's also this rather broad TV brightness option. You can use auto, which adjusts things based on ambient room light, and it's a setting that I never use, by the way. Or there's darker, dark, normal, bright, and brighter. This is a pretty common Roku picture setting that helps folks who may never get into some of the more specific picture settings get a picture that is suitably bright for their viewing environment. For me, in order to get at the TV's peak luminance, I chose brighter for most of my measurements. And here's the data. In SDR, the TV put out 580 nits from a 10% white window. In HDR modes, the results were interesting. In a peak luminance test that runs through various window sizes, the peak brightness topped out at 825 nits. Now, this was with local dimming at high, okay? In a peak luminance stability test in which I used a 10% window, and that has been a standard for a long time, it was stable at 700 nits. That kind of threw me for a second, but when I went back to the first test, I noticed that the TV was brightest when it was putting up a bigger 25% window. So I ran the second test with a bigger window, and sure enough, it was in the low 800s. That pointed to the fact that due to the TV's local dimming system and how it reacted to these test patterns, it was capable of higher brightness when more backlights were being used. That is what triggered me to adjust the local dimming setting down to medium. And when I did that, peak brightness increased across the board. Now I was getting 930 nits from a 25% window and closer to 850 from a 10% window, which again, kind of interesting, but let's set that aside for just a second. As for white balance, even with the warm color temp in the movie mode, the white was super heavy with blue at the brightest setting. And in HDR, the TV tracked high on the EOTF curve, so it was basically over brightening everything by just a bit. And this was true regardless of the local dimming settings changes that I was toying around with. Getting 2-point white balance calibrated wasn't too hard, but it was kind of a bear doing a 12-point adjustment, mostly because you have to use the Roku app to do deeper settings adjustments, but also because adjusting, say, 20% white on the app didn't seem to affect 20% white on the TV and so on. It was like a guessing game, but you know what? Most folks won't calibrate this TV anyway. So with that in mind, how was the color performance in these picture modes? In short, it wasn't bad by any means, but the errors were well within the threshold of human perception. So if a delta E of 3 is just barely visible to a trained eye, the average color error here was 5.55. I could tell the reds were off personally, but I don't think the average viewer would notice anything was off. So I'd say pretty acceptable at this price point. Except that's where the comparison piece comes in. Before I get to the comparison piece, let me just say now, and echo later, that on balance, this TV looks pretty good. There's nothing about it that has me worried someone will buy it and be upset that they got it. I think it offers a solid, middle-of-the-road performance overall with a couple of shining moments tossed in that make you grin. But again, we have to compare it to see how it stacks up to other TVs that you can buy. So what can we compare this TV to? Well, as I mentioned before, not much in the way of 2023 TVs. We have to go back to 2022 TVs, and I'd say that would bring in the Hisense U7H and probably the TCL 5 series. Both of those TVs sell for less than the Roku Plus Series here, and both are still available for purchase. Now, the TCL 5 series doesn't get as bright in HDR as the Roku Plus series, nor is its color gamut as good, but it has better color accuracy. Meanwhile, the Hisense U7H is kind of something of a unicorn and just outperforms the Roku Plus in all three of those metrics and for less money. So given those measurements and those comparisons, I'd say the Roku Plus is looking pretty good for the price. But measurements don't tell the whole story, as I've said many, many times before. As I watched this TV, I just felt like it lacked depth and pop. I could see that the highlights were bright and punchy, colors had a lot of zest to them, but the contrast was just missing something. And that's because the black levels weren't as deep as they needed to be in the picture areas. The letterbox bars on the top and bottom of the screen were nice and black, and there was almost no blooming with normal content and minimal blooming when I turned on closed captions. But on the picture part, it didn't have the contrast of either the U7H or TCL 5 series. Now, I switched the local dimming feature from high to medium, and while the average picture level and bright highlights got a little bit more punchy, the contrast didn't improve with the setting on high the way I hoped it would. And bear in mind, this was all evaluated as viewed directly in front of the TV. As soon as you view it from off to the side a bit, or even if you're too high or too low, the contrast and color saturation take a big hit. Most mid-range LCD TVs do, but the Roku Plus series here just seems to struggle a bit more. I don't know, I'll have to do a head-to-head comparison because perhaps my memory isn't serving me well. I just know I'm not thrilled about the off-angle performance. And then there's motion resolution. Sure, much of the content I'm watching is delivered at 60 Hertz from streaming services. Some of it, though, is 24 FPS. And while judder was never a big problem, motion blur is. Yes, there are some motion smoothing options available, but y'all know I can't stand that look. And without motion smoothing, I feel like the motion performance is not as good as the TCL 5 series or Hisense U7H. I'm gonna spend some time playing games at 60 Hertz and see how that goes, and I'll update in the comments soon. Finally, upscaling. Well, if you're mostly streaming, I suppose the TV won't have to do a ton of upscaling. A lot of really popular content is in 4K as it is. But where live streaming TV is concerned, and a lot of that is in 720p, and if you're watching classic TV, that's gonna be 480p at best, and more likely even lower resolution. So I loaded up the Roku channel. Two broke girls. Looks good. Looks as I'd expect. About the same as if I was watching cable. Some stutter here and there I notice. What about Quantum Leap? Certainly a trip down memory lane. This was filmed in 16:9, so it's not zoomed in on, but the resolution is still pretty low and there's a fair bit of grain. Not a whole lot of cleanup processing that the Roku Plus is doing there. Though I will say that the TV is doing a pretty decent job getting rid of some of the banding that I would expect to see. Now let's go Rockford Files. This is in its native 4:3 format, and honestly, it looks way better than I expected. Maybe it's because there's less of the screen taken up by the grainy image, but for an older show, it looks solid. I was tempted to move on to Chips, Airwolf, and A-Team, but that nostalgia trip will have to wait. I'd seen enough to know that the upscaling on this TV is gonna be just fine for this TV's target audience. I don't recall either the TCL 5 series or U7H being much better. In fact, this might even be a bit better than the U7H. Other things I like about this TV, the screen uniformity is surprisingly good. Minimal vignetting in the corners, little bit of darkening on the left and right edges. Overall though, far better than I've seen on most TVs in this price bracket. And then there's the sound quality. Folks, I'm pretty impressed. I won't say it's doing anything magical for dialogue clarity, but the overall fidelity is totally respectable. It sounds full and rich. There's far more bass than I was expecting, and the stereo effects were truly impressive. Did not see that coming. And yes, I remembered to disconnect the Klipsch the 9 speakers that are sitting on either side. So after all that, what's my takeaway on the Roku Plus Series TV? It's a quality television with some glimmers of greatness at times. I think it's gonna stand up well against like-price competing Samsung, LG, and maybe even Sony TVs in terms of performance for the price. It's TCL and Hisense, Roku partners, by the way, that pose the biggest threat to this TV because those two brands have historically offered TVs that punch well above their price points and do so in a convincing manner that Roku Plus here just doesn't quite pull off. I gotta say though, for a first effort, I'm pretty impressed. Roku could have gotten a lot wrong with this TV, but it drew on its experience blueprinting TVs for other brands and landed on really solid footing with its first upscale TV tier. How well it'll end up standing up against tougher challengers remains to be seen. But while that question is one I think enthusiasts may be interested to see answered, most folks just looking for a really solid TV at a nice price, they'll probably be opening their wallets for the Roku Plus series here. Thanks as always for watching, everyone. How do you think the Roku Plus did? Leave me a comment with your thoughts down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one, which is a big one, believe me. And until then, here's 2 other videos I think you might like.